Welcome to the D Word Podcast. My name is Dion. Today I want to talk about how you should start recording your own podcast, doing your own podcast. How can one do one? So it's very simple, right? Podcasting is changing the way we consume media. I've been a radio broadcaster now for almost 20 years, and in my time of radio, I've always learned that you need to evolve with the content. All of us can't listen to the radio show every single day, but we can play catch up to the radio show if there was a podcast available. So think of a podcast as a portable version of the radio broadcast. It's a shorter version or longer version. So a podcast is built on audio. So if you missed the radio show, as an example, you can listen to the podcast version of the radio show when you want to, according to your own time. So podcasts are that, audio. Or of anything. Religious people do podcasts, news people do podcasts, motivational speakers do podcasts. Anyone does a podcast nowadays. So if you want to start one, how can you go about starting one? First thing you need to do is get a cool name for your podcast. Once you have the cool name for your podcast, then try and script a couple of shows as to how you want to do it. Do you want to interview people? Then get the interviews, get the questions done. Then comes, do you want to do solo? If you want to do solo, it's a bit more harder because you've got to create content all the time built on yourself. If you want to record your podcast, invest in a good microphone, done. Computer, microphone, done. Then you could edit it on Audacity. It's a free app that you can download, Audacity. And from there, you can clean up the audio if there's any mistakes and put it out there for your community. If you want to go the video route, remember a video version of a podcast is what people also like. That is called a vodcast or a vidcast. So make sure you also have people who can edit your video before you put it out on YouTube. The bonus of putting it on YouTube is that the community is much more wider than the streaming services, because the streaming services need to be advertised to your community, which means you got to get social media to be your friend. So if you're using Spotify, Google Podcasts, or Apple Podcasts, those platforms by far work better and people will do it. So if you want to start a podcast, just reminiscing it again, get a cool name, invest in a good microphone, and then pick your strategy. Interview or solo. Once you got that done, package your podcast weekly or monthly, and then keep at it. Keep it like seasons of a TV show. And if you want to go the video route, then you can utilize YouTube. YouTube by far is the best one. And then keep at it. A podcast can be very interesting. Once you start gaining momentum in what you're sharing, then that will work. I will share with you something that I did. I started my podcast back in 2020. And the first season of my podcast, I did a trial run where I interviewed guests, and then I realized it wasn't working out. Some of the guests who were very famous didn't do as well as how I expected, and it was a learning experience. But then sometimes, if you look at the podcasts that did do well, were the ones that were personal, the ones where I started sharing personal stuff. So if you didn't know this, I deleted all my old episodes of my podcast, and I took a sabbatical from July of 2022 till July 2023, and I figured out, what am I going to do? So I realized I wanted to go the solo route because I felt it was better and people wanted shorter podcasts but more entertaining content. So that's what I did. I looked at the audience and saw, hey, this is what's working and this is what's not working. Let's go ahead. I realized there were many people doing interviews with famous celebs. So let me try and do something different. And that's what I do. So I just share anything that's on my mind. I do take elements from the radio show and bring it here. But I try to give shorter podcasts, but more in-depth ones with the topics at mind. So if you want to start a podcast, I highly suggest you should, because it's fun, it's cool, and it gets to test your radio skills on a microphone. Because if you are doing podcasting, you are like a radio presenter. So the invitation is there. Do a podcast. Start one. And if you're a teenager, you should be starting one, because your mind thinks differently to an adult. So you may have a different opinion. And a podcast is a place where you should. I'll never forget, before Twitter became X, it was the most opinionated platform. And I always tell people, if you are on Twitter, you should actually be a podcaster, because your opinions matter there when you can say it out to the universe. So if you want to start a podcast, you should start one today. Don't forget, the rules are simple. Keep at it. invest in a good microphone, and keep the episodes entertaining. Don't waffle too much. Try and be interesting, concise, and to the point. Podcasting is fun, whether you have guests or whether you don't. But make sure you have a very interesting name for your podcast. This has been the D Word Podcast with me, Dion, and hopefully the small little podcast was useful to you in you starting your podcast journey. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them on my socials. We'll be glad to help you and assist you. Oh, one more fact. If you want to do a podcast, make sure you also have a website where all of them can be homed, the video version and the audio version. Just a fun fact. Use it, don't use it. Until next time, take care. Thanks for checking it out.